Welcome, everyone. We are here with Dr. Carolyn Fleck, who I had an opportunity to get to know through Guy Kawasaki, sort of an old industry friend from way back when, and had a chance to learn a little bit about her work and start to read her book, Validation, which we're going to talk about today. And so, welcome, Carolyn. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Well, before we get started into the nitty gritty of your life and your work and your book, I'm just going to give people a little bit of a short background about you for people who are new to your work. Dr. Carolyn Fleck is a psychologist who has served as a supervisor and consultant for some of the country's most rigorous psychology programs, including Dr. Marsha Linehan's BRTC at the University of Washington, the Department of Psychiatry at Stanford Medical Center, and the VA in Palo Alto. A world-renowned expert on the topic of validation, her new book, Validation, How the Skill Set That Revolutionized Psychology Will Transform Your Relationships, Increase Your Influence, and Change Your Life. This came out in 2025, and it has since been translated into 9 languages, which is amazing, right? Within 1 year of coming out. So thanks again. I can't wait to get into the topic of validation.
Thank you. Me too. It's one of my favorite topics.
Yeah, I can see that. You wrote a whole book about it. So let's talk a little bit about your personal journey. I always love to rewind the clock a little bit. Because there's always like a personal journey of why someone ended up where they ended up. I'm sure there's more than one catalyst, but what was the main catalyst for you that brought you to where you are now and doing this work?
Yeah. I used to be really dodgy in responding to this question because you get it all the time throughout your training when you're applying for different, an internship, a fellowship, what brought you to this work? What are your motivations? And the truth of the matter is that I had struggled with major depressive disorder when I was in high school. I was diagnosed in high school, and I suffered through, it was over a decade. And fortunately, I didn't have anxiety or some of the other issues that folks often struggle with, but the depression was just all defining, overwhelming. And I did all of the things. I did all the therapy. I tried all the medication, and nothing was working. And to be honest, I thought, okay, this is how arrogant I am. I think, well, none of this is working. I'm going to go into the field and figure out how to do this myself. Okay. I'm going to solve this puzzle. I ended up fortunately getting treatment and getting into remission. As I was training to be a psychologist, part of what I realized in that process is that so much of the difficulty I had had in treatment for depression came down to the degree to which I felt truly just invalidated by a lot of the folks, a lot of the therapists and people I worked with. And that was a pretty big insight for me. Interestingly, though, the other thing I realized that ironically ended up being very therapeutic for me is that I feel things deeply. I'm a highly sensitive person. I think that is part of what predisposed me to depression. But in training to become what's called a dialectical behavior therapist, it's a type of therapy, it's called DBT, which I was just really into, and I pursued that as my area of expertise. I learned how to use my kind of innate ability to connect with folks and use that sensitivity as a superpower. And it was in doing that I started to extract real meaning, both from the depression itself and that experience, and then also the work that I was doing with clients. And so, truth be told, I came into this work to try and figure out how to treat depression. Along the way, I ended up finding a lot of meaning in my experience. And one of the takeaways was that I could lean into this emotional uh, sensitivity, if you want to call it that. And the way to do that was through validation. I could use this sensitivity to help me attune to other people's emotions so that I could validate them directly. And that is a tremendous power once you know how to do it.
Yeah, powerful and healing for everyone in your wake when you understand the tools.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. This thing that had felt like such a burden. And it can be, right, when it's running amok in your life. There was also another side to it, which is that it gave me a lot of insight. And, you know, what did they say? Like any weapon, anything can be like a tool or a weapon if you can figure out how to hold it right.
So you've also had to overcome some health challenges, some
Hmm.
medical health challenges as well. And
Hmm.
not only have you made it through the other side, but it seems as if you've done so with grace.
Mm.
And what advice would you have, or really insights more than in advice, in having to go through that transition of medical hiccups? And you've had more than one, right? You've had quite a few. So if you're okay with sharing that part
Oh,
of your
yeah.
story, and then of course how it plays into the work that you do.
Yeah, so I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis when I was 28, and then breast cancer actually while I was writing the book. And we had to delay publication by 2 years as I underwent, chemotherapy and radiation. And yeah, my life in many ways has felt like one thing after another, kind of in that sense. Um, and this is the weirdest thing to say, but I am truly grateful for that experience I had with depression at a young age, because what it taught me was that the only way through this suffering is to make meaning out of it. And so, and I almost can't communicate how deeply I feel this in my bones at this point. So when um, I I had a double mastectomy, and they didn't think I was going to need chemotherapy. They thought they'd had it. And then I met with the doctor afterwards, and they said, you know what? It had actually spread to the lymph nodes. It was pervasive throughout the lymph nodes. They had to take a bunch out. You're going to need all this treatment. And I was devastated. And my first reaction to my husband was, we need to go to a kill shelter now and get two kittens to foster. I know this sounds like super weird, but like I had to do something immediately. Like I needed to feel like this was going to push me to do something I wouldn't have otherwise done, and that it was going to be important to someone or something. And the most immediate thing, for whatever reason, that I had my head around, well, actually, our cat had just died, so that's why my head was on it. But like it has become that much of a one-to-one, that like when that suffering is acute, when it's overwhelming, the need for me to channel it into something meaningful, to use it as fuel. Because I think suffering it's a weird type of energy, right? Like energy is neither created nor destroyed. And you have to figure out what you're going to do with that. Because if you do nothing, it will just fester and it will take you down. But if you can use it as fuel and channel it, it can become a very different thing. And so that I developed that relationship with suffering at a young age, and it has become just a pathway that I take and that my brain gets into. Kind of, it's just a way that I process now, that I'm truly grateful for.
Wow, Carolyn, I didn't know that piece of it. That's a lot to take
It's been
on.
a lot. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a
Well,
lot,
I
but
think it's a kind of a very pivotal message, especially for women who are listening. Also, in this series in our podcast, it was maybe a year and a half ago now, or 2 years even. Dr. Laura Esserman was one of our guests, who's one of the
mm,
top breast care surgeons in the country,
yeah,
and is a really big advocate for, no one breast cancer is the same, and
yes.
how we treat breast cancer as one disease when it's really very, very different and multifaceted. And there's so many different ways to treat it. And I think I lost my mother to breast cancer. I think
Oh, I
there's
didn't know. I'm
probably,
sorry.
well, there's not probably one woman who hasn't been affected by
That's
breast
right.
cancer.
That is
you know.
so right. That's so right. And that's actually one of the things this experience has taught me is women are freaking warriors. I am walking among warriors. I had no idea. All of these women who oh yeah, I had breast cancer 20 years ago, and that was back before they had, newer chemotherapies, and I can't feel my feet, just like on and on and on, and just these silent little like warriors. Um,
Who
it was
might be raising a family as a single mother on top of it,
oh yeah,
you
oh
know.
yeah. With again, talk about like, in the 70s, these conditions were not validated, appreciated, understood to the extent that they are now in terms of how they affect a woman's psychology, how they affect her role as a mother, as a caretaker when her body is, stripped of everything that, would facilitate that. So
Yeah.
it's been inspiring, oddly enough.
Well, and I also think too, you know, I'm a little older than you, but kind of growing up, there's so much emphasis on how we look and that our breasts are who we are. It's like a part of
Yeah,
our sexual identity. And
yeah.
I'll never forget, a friend of mine back when I lived in Boston, and she found out that her family had the gene.
Oh
And
gosh,
so she
yeah.
proactively had both of her breasts off. And I
Mm.
remember asking her, Deb, are you sure about this? Right? Is there not another way? And she looked, and she was married, she was married. So it wasn't like she was out there dating or, having to go through any of these obstacles or fear. But she said, I have two children. She
Yeah,
said,
yeah.
my breasts are nothing to me. Like, not
Mm,
nothing, but the way she just said, like, compared to my children,
yeah,
compared to me being around, it's nothing. And it really put things into perspective for me. And it was very inspiring because she made the decision not to make it a big deal, not to
yeah,
excuse her suffering or not to
yeah, yeah.
unvalidate, her
Yeah, yeah,
feelings and her emotions, but just to put it into perspective and to find meaning in it. And,
yeah, yeah,
and look, here you are, an advocate for women. You're an
yeah.
advocate for validation and
Hmm,
for,
hmm,
hearing people's pain and their suffering in a way that makes them feel validated. So
hmm.
I do think that, everyone's path, albeit unique, there's always a reason that something
Yeah,
happens. It's to help
yeah,
you step into really your purpose.
yeah, yeah. And it is up to you to take those steps as well. Like there's always an easier path, I think. Um, but it will not lead you in the direction of your purpose if it's easy.
Yeah, yeah,
At least that's
that's
been my experience.
yeah, no, that's so true. I mean, you need to stretch, as Tony Robbins always says, love him or hate him. But
Adam, right, right, right.
some of
Yeah.
the his big advice was that your comfort level of
Hmm.
you have to get far beyond your comfort zone to really stretch and grow and expand and step into your purpose. One thing that I really, really loved about your book is some of the language that you use. It's very carefully constructed to not only put you at ease, but, for those who are listening, there's like a summary at the end of each chapter, which I
Mm.
love, and then examples of how you can practice.
Oh yeah.
And so again, we're not gonna go into all the pieces of her ladder of eight. There's 8 steps and eight
Hmm.
different ways, but we'll talk about some of them. And these are, 8 steps on the ladder to being seen and to seeing. So being acknowledged, being seen and heard. And I feel like we all want to just resonate with each other. Can you talk a
Yeah.
little bit? I don't know if that language attunes to you or not, but
Yeah.
this idea of resonance, we want to resonate with another person. And a lot of the steps that you talk about are to get us to resonate.
Yeah, that's right. So in my book, I talk about 8 skills, basically. These are skills that I learned as a therapist. So as I mentioned before, I was studying dialectical behavior therapy, which is a treatment for a specific population of folks who have a condition known as borderline personality disorder, or BPD. All right. And we master these skills to help us validate these clients who often are coming from environments, family histories, uh, traumatic experiences in which they were deeply invalidated. All right. And so I've got to be really skillful in my ability to both communicate, hey, I see you, I'm not judging you, but guess what? I also have to help this person change. I have to help them develop, grow, and build a life worth living, which almost always includes doing things somewhat differently from how they've been doing it. Okay. So when I'm tasked with both of those objectives, I was trained to use these validation skills. If you help someone feel seen, believe it or not, they will be more receptive to your feedback, to working on things, to growing. Shame decreases in the light of acceptance. And when shame decreases, flexibility and openness are what you get. And so that was like, I mean, obviously very important for my clinical work. Uh, it has also been transformative for me as a person, just noticing in myself the need to just feel seen, and that's important. We really pathologize validation in the media. It's like, oh, don't seek external validation. That's so bad, which is hilarious to me because when I say to folks, do you think you should validate people that you love? Should you? Oh, of course. Yeah. Yes, of course. It's very obvious. Yes. Validation is important. Should you seek external validation? No, 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 no. That's horrible. That's very shallow. And so the language, as you were alluding to, the language matters here because when I talk about validation, I'm not talking about praise. I'm not talking about agreement. I'm saying simply that you see some part of another person's experience as valid, and you open with that, not on what you think they need to change. So that's kind of some of how we navigate this space clinically. And let me tell you, what applies clinically applies globally.
Well, I mean, how many times have you heard, in terms of really good listening skills,
Yeah.
that I can't remember who came out with this data or this research, but that when we're engaging with someone, so often, 80% of the time, we're trying to think about what we're going to say rather than totally being present with the person and hearing them, attuning to them.
That's right. That's exactly right. There's another thing we're doing 80% of the time. And this might get me in trouble with some listeners who really, really, my type A's, such as myself, who really like to problem solve. 80 to 90% of the time, when people come to us with an issue, they want to feel heard. They want to feel accepted. 80 to 90% of the time, what they receive is problem solving. We give them advice. We basically tell them what they need to change to feel better, which suggests that what they're feeling is not okay. There's no space to just feel and have that be. Now, I'm not saying you don't ever get to problem solve. I'm just saying opening with that approach is rarely effective. And that is one thing decades of doing therapy has taught me. Don't open with problem solving and advice. I don't care how good it is. It's not going to land if the other person doesn't feel heard first.
I'm cracking up because I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to mark the timestamp of this particular piece of advice to ensure that my partner listens to it. If he doesn't listen to the whole interview, he's going to listen to this one.
I get that all the time. Time.
Funny.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, let me think about this. Yeah, I have a vulnerable example. I've shared it before, but it might make some of this, which is, I'm worried it's sounding abstract, but can I give an example that might make it more concrete?
That would be great. Examples are always wonderful.
This was from a while ago, actually. After I was diagnosed with breast cancer, as I mentioned, I'd lost my hair. And this was very hard for my younger daughter, who was in third grade at the time. And she felt like I was a different person, like truly like a body snatcher scenario. Like her mom was gone and I was a different person. And after I was treated, my hair's coming back, I feel like we've really come a long way. And we're having this tender moment at night. And she says, we're fooling around. The lights are off and we're just like, giggling under the covers and joking. And I went to turn the lights, and she said, "Oh, no, no, don't turn the lights on. I like you like this. This is like my old mom." And I said, "Well, honey, I am the same mom." And she said, "No, you're different now. I just want this mom, my old mom, back." And so my inclination was to say, like, "Honey, I love you just as much now as I ever did," which is, what I said. "And I am the same person." Okay. And she got quiet, and the moment kind of passed. And the next day, I'm literally writing this book on validation. I realized I didn't validate any of her experience, which is that from her perspective, she's grieving this loss that nobody else seems to see or appreciate. And rather than saying, like, that makes sense and this is hard, I tried to change how she was thinking. I did it very tenderly, right? Very tenderly. I don't think there was anything, quote unquote, wrong about that. I just think that it failed to see and help her put words to what she was experiencing. And so I did circle back with her the next night and say, "I missed something. Like, you really feel like something between us is different. And this person that you loved feels different to you. And that must be so weird to deal with that when everyone else acts like it's no big deal, like I'm the same. And like, you're the only one that sees it." And she goes, "Yes, yes. Why doesn't anyone see it?" And I said, "I don't know. That must be so, but like, then she opened up, then we were talking more. And so this is kind of what I mean. Like, sometimes that problem solving is so subtle, and we come at it with the best intentions, right? And yet, are we hearing what the other person is saying?
Well, Caroline, to your credit, sunshine, I mean, what you've gone through is a lot. And if my daughter had said that to me, I
Mm,
probably would have wanted to shrivel up and cry. Like, what part of me
mm.
is different? Like, I still love you as much. So I think, don't be too hard on yourself, even though you're an
Yeah,
expert in this field, because, your daughter is so close to home. And I think,
yeah,
having gone through that, there was probably part of you that was like, what part of me's changed, for her?
yeah.
Is she,
Oh, yeah.
all of those things that's spinning and going through your head. So, kudos on you for going back the next day, rethinking it, reframing it, and getting that response,
Yeah,
so that you can get closer. I think that's a really great example because, regardless of if it's cancer, it could be a divorce,
right.
right?
That's
Where
right. That's right. That's
you
right. But like, even, now turning that inward, I've in my life and in my work, I really focus on how do I validate other people. But I need to emphasize, this is so important for people to hear. Through that practice, I have become so much better at seeing the kernel of truth in my perspective and being
yeah.
able to validate myself. So, okay, again, boy, I'm just really telling you everything. So like, prepping for today's call, I was self-conscious because my hair, I'm like, it didn't quite grow back in there, things that you probably can't see that I am like so upset about. I'm like, oh, there's a patch that's missing here, and you're going to be able to see it. And then I'm in my head doing the whole, like, right, you're so shallow, right? You're so lucky to have hair. And here you are obsessing over this little thing. And I had to say to myself, whoa, hold on. This has been a major pain point in your relationship with your daughter. Okay. It has really, it resulted in some insecurity, in terms of how you feel about yourself and whether or not you are yourself. Of course, you're obsessing over that. That makes
Yeah,
total
but
sense.
also think about how women have been conditioned, and I think,
And then I went there. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I mean, why, of course I'm going to be thinking this. I'm looking, when I validate, I'm looking for the validity. Like, of course it makes sense that I'm feeling, thinking, or doing whatever it is. Right.
well, again, I hate to bring up the age thing, but as your older sister, because I
I
am
love it. I love
right, I
it.
am older than you, and I think this is very normal for, yes, cancer is hard because, when my father went through it, because he had a full head of hair, and
Uh,
it was his thing. It was the
yeah.
thing that he was, women would look at him because of the hair. He had the
Yeah,
charisma
yeah.
because of the hair. And so, when he lost his hair, he's like, I have nothing to live for anymore. And I thought, oh, how crazy is that to say? But I understood it because it was such a part of his identity. And I think as we get older, you're having to go through some of these physical changes earlier because of your chemo. But as women
Oh yeah.
age,
Oh yeah.
there's like, I was going through that too, where, it's like, oh my God, you
Yeah.
can see
Can you
like,
see it? Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, the
Can you see it?
central, for people who have known me for a long time, it's like, oh, your hair is thinning out. It's,
Right,
you go
right.
through all of this, self-doubt. And I think one of the most powerful things you can do is sit down with your daughter and make sure, as you've been doing, that
Right.
it's those ideas and perceptions, because they're really perceptions, are not passed forward to the next generation, because that's where healing takes place for girls.
Yeah, and I'm also quick to say, because I also see a lot of women blaming themselves for being so shallow, blaming themselves for caring about these things. And to your point, how could you not? All right, like it is, we can't like it almost feels like victim blaming, right? That I see kind of a lot of women and people in general just doing to themselves, be it the pressure to be high performing or high earning or all of these things. And it's like, yeah, you've learned that. That has been reinforced for you. So no wonder this feels so critical. That makes sense. And
Yeah.
it's not the most important thing, right?
Yeah,
Like
it's
both of
not.
those things can be true.
Well, when I think of Deb's response, and this was, by the way, 30 years ago, probably, because she's
Yeah.
older than I am. So this happened to her in her 20s.
Mm,
And when she put it into perspective, like the most important thing to me is my family, my children, being vital for them,
mhm.
regardless of what I look like. And it really hit home for me. I was like,
Yeah.
she's really putting things into perspective about what really matters. And, I hear that from so many friends who have gone through cancer. They come out the other side and they say, all my priorities have changed. All of
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Everything's changed. And it's made them more powerful, stronger. There's a sense of resolve and a conviction that they
Yeah.
didn't have before, and a sense of priorities. Kind of like when we went through COVID, everybody spent more time with their families and had deeper
Hmm.
connection time. And so I think a crisis, whether it's a disease or a divorce or a loss of a job or being booted out of your house, there's all these things. Speaking of all
Yeah.
the issues that's happening around the world, but particularly in the United States at the moment, we are going through a mental health crisis. And you talk about that mental health crisis as a validation
Yeah.
crisis. Do you want to
Yeah.
go deeper into that, which is a nice segue to go deeper into
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
book?
Yeah. As I was, suggesting there with our emphasis on problem solving, it is what we are raised on. Our parents, me as a parent, I can cop to this. The emphasis is on making things better, making things good, keeping our kids safe. It's on solving problems. We train children in debate, right? And how to take a position and argue that position. All right. We don't do a lot to emphasize seeing the kernel of truth in another person's perspective, or um, seeking acceptance, not praise, but acceptance in our relationships. And instead, what we are seeing, especially with the rise of social media, is that relationships have become very much about likes and heart emojis and photoshopped, filtered images. And the message beneath all of that is you are not unconditionally accepted. You are conditionally accepted. If you look and perform a certain way, I will accept you. You will be part of the clan, right? If you don't, you're not. And so I think that creates I'm seeing it. I work a lot with adolescent girls, and it's really sad to me, the degree to which you can't just be, you must perform.
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing social media for a long time, so it's a really interesting topic for me because I think, as I've gotten older, um, it infuriates me more.
Yeah.
And, threads, right? Everyone's like, you got to get on threads now. And I
Yeah.
started looking at the platform and, I have an advisor on it. I can't believe, I used to be the social media pundit. Now I'm getting advice. 20 something year old.
I
And
know.
and she said, well, you really need to change the language to be like this. And I'm like, but that's not me.
Yeah, I
And she said, well,
know.
do you want to get engagement? Do you want to sell products? And she says, you have to shift it. And I said, but I don't sound like that. That's not authentically me. And I thought, okay, forget it. I'm not doing threads. That's it. I think, at some point you just like, you can't sell yourself out. But
But
unfortunately,
like, I don't think adolescents have that choice. They can't
I
just
know,
say, they
I
really
know,
can't say, okay, I'm just not going to do social media. No, they have to sell out to fit in.
I
And
know.
they don't realize that that's what they're doing.
Yeah,
Um, but
you're
because it's
absolutely
become
right.
normalized, it's been normalized.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's what I mean when when I say I think the mental health crisis is in many ways a validation crisis. We are not prioritizing cultivating, much less communicating acceptance internally or externally. And that is a problem. It doesn't sell. I mean, you're okay as you are does not sell anything at Sephora. It just doesn't,
Now,
unfortunately.
though, and I can't even remember who it is now, it's a pretty famous actress who I think's in her 60s now. She's had no work done. I
Oh,
can't think who it is now. Maybe she's even 70. And there's a couple of others who are following suit. I've seen Glenn Close and Jamie
oh
Lee
yeah, yeah.
Curtis. They're
Yes, yes, yes.
constantly on their feeds without makeup, showing their wrinkles. And I'm like, you go, sister, right? Because
Yeah,
we need to see that. All of us need
yeah.
to see it. Men need to see that.
And I'll also validate the other side of it, which is to say that I'm wearing makeup. I get Botox. I do, right? And despite the fact that I know what that perpetuates, and I know that that is not my authentic self, and I have to validate that that is part of the conditioning I've had. It's really messed up to me that I feel more like myself when I have makeup on, but that is
Mm,
the case.
isn't
Um,
that interesting? I have a
you
friend
know,
who I went to judgment when it first happened, and I was younger. We're still friends to this day, but he started losing his hair.
uh,
And, he's kind of on the front line. He was a head sales and tech engineer guy at one of the top three companies and pretty high up. So he was very visible. He was always in and out of
yeah.
new business development meetings. Anyway, he decided to have the hair threads done,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
that whole process. And I thought, God, you're so handsome. Why do you need that? Like, that is so not validating, is it?
Right, right,
Just
right.
like, you don't need that. You look great as you are. But you know what? When he had it done, I was like, whoa, it looked amazing. And I thought, how different is that than throwing on a jar of hair dye? It's not. It's not.
That's
And
right.
it really isn't. So, I think back to that. I'm probably going to go back to him and say, you remember like 15 years ago when you did that? I'm validating you because it looks
I'm like, good for you. But it's
good
this,
for you.
it's like we have to be able to, I think just because I aspire to be better doesn't mean I have to be judgmental and hateful about where I am. I need to have understanding and compassion for where I am if I am going to evolve. I do believe that.
Yeah.
Um, and so I try to have that. I don't always get there, but I try to.
Well, you said that you're highly sensitive. When you were talking
Mm.
about your childhood and dealing with depression, and we call that an empath, right? So if you're an
Yeah.
you're feeling people's emotions, and I
Yeah.
think it's a wondrous thing, really. I mean, it's hard and challenging at times, but if we had more empaths in the world, we probably wouldn't be at war right now. So
Or if we
um,
had more empaths in control.
yes, there you go. A few more women at the
Yeah.
helm, we should say.
Hmm.
So let's talk about some of the context of behavior that we can do around validation.
Yeah.
What should you say that all emotions are valid?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Yeah. So can you expand upon this with some, I mean, actually, we've kind of organically talked a little bit about some examples, but what should be validated and what shouldn't be validated?
I'm so glad you asked that question because often when people hear me talk on this topic, they're like, okay, I just have to say that everything is, there's a kernel of truth in everything and everything is okay. No. So when I'm working with clients, oftentimes their thinking is very distorted. Oftentimes their behavior is very ineffective or it's creating serious problems for them. All right. I only need to validate that which I consider to be valid. Sometimes that's a person's thoughts, but not their behavior. I can see why you're really upset with your ex-boyfriend for cheating on you. I don't think you should have slashed his tires, but I understand why you would want to, right? My job is to find and look for what I can genuinely consider to be valid and to validate that, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
often when I'm, especially nowadays when you've got folks on different sides of the political spectrum, and it's so easy to focus on the shiny thing, which is what I disagree with, what I take issue with, and what's wrong. My job is to try and focus on what makes sense. And from there, I can attack what's wrong. But to be clear, you can validate a person's emotions, their behaviors, or their thoughts. You do not and should not validate all three unless they're legitimately valid. That is what we call looking for the kernel of truth. Find that one piece that makes sense. That's what it takes.
Well, there's got to be a gray area where in psychology you call it enabling, right? So there has to be a gray area where you're enabling behavior that is destructive.
That's exactly right. And so I can say it makes total sense that you would want to reach me this afternoon, given what's going on for you. Calling me 1,300 times is not okay. All right. That's ineffective. That burns me out. That makes me not want to respond. That makes me not want to work with you.
Yeah.
We see all this in the corporate space as well. Hey, manager, it makes sense that you want this slide deck, but sending me 1,300 emails in the span of 2 hours isn't going to make me get it faster. Right? I understand the distress. I'm worried too. I'll get back to you when I can. So it's not about having no boundaries. On the contrary, it is how you have boundaries and assert them effectively.
So how do we validate someone we don't agree with?
So again, validation isn't agreement. One of the arguments or examples I often give is the fact that I'm a vegetarian. I don't eat meat for ethical reasons. Okay. I can see a ton of valid reasons why somebody would. All right. And if I want to try and validate them, I would speak to those first. I don't agree that that is sufficient. But yeah, it can be harder to order at some restaurants. Yes, uprooting your diet at however old you are is a lot to take on when you're already doing 1,300 things. Yeah, reflecting on the devastating situation of our planet and the animals that live on it, that's a way to bum yourself out, for sure. It makes sense that you're making your lifestyle choices. I don't agree with them, but I can see where you're coming from. So that is my task, is to always try and find where the person is coming from. Okay, not whether or not I agree with them. If I get hung up on that, I'll go nowhere.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great example, actually. I'm just sort of thinking about how heated things feel right now and how sensitive. It feels like people are walking on eggshells. That's what it feels
Yeah.
like to me right now.
Yeah. And again, one of the reasons we use these techniques in therapy is because in therapy, we've got to be able to talk about things directly and effectively. Because if behaviors don't change, people get hurt oftentimes. All right. And so there's no dancing around, there's no eggshells. Like, we've got to, you got to stop stalking people, basically, right? Me included, if that's the case. And so we can't be really delicate about how we talk about it. We have to be direct and concrete. These are the tools I use to do that.
So there's a section in your book where you talk about some people question and doubt whether they should share their own struggles
Mm,
and their journey, as
yeah.
you did at the beginning of this interview.
Yeah.
But it seems like you've learned that in some cases, disclosing your own challenges can help to validate someone else. What are a couple
Yeah.
of great examples?
Oh, sure. So to clarify, when we talk about validation, I never really defined it, but we say that it includes these qualities of attention, understanding, and empathy. And when you convey all of that in one fell swoop, the person feels deeply, deeply validated. Sometimes you don't have all that. You don't understand, you don't empathize, in which case all you can do is pay attention.
Mm,
Other times you do. You've had breast cancer. And so when the person is talking to me about it, I don't know everything, but I can empathize and I understand some of that. All right. So if I have that insight, if I were to self-disclose, effectively there, that could be a high level of validation. Can also backfire, right?
mm,
Um, the more powerful skills are also the more dangerous in that they can blow up in your face, right?
mm.
We've all had the person who is just talking about themselves and looking for any opportunity to do so and turn it, around about them or too much. Oh my God, I did not need to know about this woman's daughter, her cancer, and her MS on this podcast, right? Like it's a delicate balance. And so a lot of what I talk about in the book is how to develop these skills. Like I just basically give the same training I received as a therapist. Here's how you know when to self-disclose. Here's how you know not to, when not to. But in my work, sometimes, I mean, breaking the rules is often, oddly enough, sometimes the most effective. And so, in working with clients who are struggling with depression, I will often say, I struggled with depression. I took all those drugs. I did all
Mm.
those things, right? I'm not sitting up here with like you don't get to know me. I'm the expert. You're the damaged person, right? Like, I get it on some level. I don't get all of it. But those moments can be very powerful when a manager discloses the struggles that they're having with corporate. You're like, ooh, wait, what? Really? Or that they're struggling with returning back to work after their second child, even though it was easy with the first. These moments that we often see as like controversial, I mean, they can be problematic for sure. They can also be transformative because of the humanity that they reflect and the intimacy that they create.
What you just said made me think of something called neurolinguistic programming, and that's NLP for short, right? And it's this idea of breaking a pattern up. And
Mm.
so, when you said some of the best practices or the rules, right,
Yeah,
that you've
yeah, yeah,
learned, if you do something different, in a way, it sort of acts like NLP. It's breaking up this pattern, and someone can't track it. Wait a minute, she wasn't
yeah,
supposed to say that. She said this
yeah,
instead. And
yeah.
so it almost allows someone to become more embodied.
Yeah. And again, for some people, that means it compromises safety. They don't know what to predict. They don't, la, la, la. But it's, you know, there's you develop these skills, but absolutely under the right conditions, it isn't a moment in therapy. It is the turning point in therapy or in that managerial discussion or what have you.
Yeah. So I'd like to talk about just briefly
Yeah.
contextualizing, because that was one where I got to and I thought, this
Mhm.
feels like 90% of the men that I worked with in the technology industry, you know.
Oh,
So
how so?
it's this logical reasoning. And so it's kind of, you say that it's acknowledging a person's reaction to make sense in some context, even if it's
Yeah.
problematic or ineffective. I'm sure that people deal with this all the time, right? So I'd love, that was the part of your book that I was like, yeah, I don't know
Yeah.
about this one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Good, good. Okay, so contextualizing, we look at it as this is a validation skill. And I use this skill most often when someone is doing something that I find ineffective, all right, or that I struggle to make sense of. And in using this skill, I'm basically recognizing that every effect has a cause. And I need to speak to or look for that cause to be able to understand and validate this person's behavior. So I'll give kind of an extreme example that I think maps well. If you were at a PTA meeting and a door slammed and somebody immediately ducked under the chair, you would think that is odd. Yeah. However, if you were actually in a VA treating a group of folks who were just back from active duty and a door slammed and somebody ducked you would think that makes perfect sense, right? In both situations, their behavior is not effective in the current scenario at all, but it makes perfect sense given where they're coming from.
Yeah.
All right. And when we miss that point, and this is the point where we can talk about people's history without throwing it in their face. Like, yeah, it makes sense that you shut down during conflict. Conflict was really dangerous and explosive in your home growing up. Your body doesn't know how to do anything else. That doesn't mean it's effective. We've got to be able to talk. But I understand where this thing that I'm observing is coming from, rather than I'm judging it because of the context.
Yeah.
Right. The alternative to that is like what they're doing just makes perfect sense, in which case we can equalize. And I would say, yeah, anybody in your shoes would be annoyed by the guy with the spreadsheets. Like, makes perfect sense to me. I don't need to put your behavior in some larger context or your emotion in larger context. I'd be annoyed with that guy too. Right? If I didn't understand it, I might have to. I might need to pull in other information to try and understand it. So that's me working, kind of moving the picture kind of in different ways to try and see if I can get a clear image. I see what I can do there. I can validate that way.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, especially when you have a lot of left and right brain people working together, obviously I'm more familiar with the corporate space and really more of the startup space, although I played in both worlds. But, I think about that in the context of something you just brought up, and that's medicine, right? Where you have people working together under fire. And wow, right?
Yeah.
To use your skills that you're talking about.
Yeah, huge, big time. It also reminds me actually of Sarah Silverman. I don't know if you know that comedian. She did this like short little TV show, and I can't remember the name of it is escaping me, but she went to really polarized places politically in the country. And she would just hang out with folks to try and get their perspectives on things. And in so doing, in just kind of being in their spaces, being in their homes, talking with them and their families, she would almost always be able to really beautifully validate people's perspectives, despite not agreeing with them. And I thought it was just such a teaching, man, I wish this was shown in schools, right? Like, this is what we should be teaching alongside debate, is how do we focus on understanding to foster dialogue, right? And see that as part of facilitating change and exchanging ideas and helping each other grow.
Well, I love that you printed the entire letter from Jimmy Kimmel in your book. And I loved it, actually, because, afterwards you have this great letter, and then you go on to say, this is emoting, which is one of your ladder, one of your rings on the ladder, so to speak, as an example of that done well. And so it made me want to go back, look at the language, and figure out if I could tell how he did that well. So I thought that was, I think people learn most through examples.
I totally agree. And this is one of my favorite pastimes as a psychologist who knows this stuff, is you see people using these skills all the time. They don't realize they're doing it. They don't know what it's called. All I'm trying to do is make you more aware of this stuff that's all around you, so that you can use it more strategically and intentionally, and when you need it most, when you are across from that uncle at Thanksgiving who you're like, I don't know what to do with this person, you can tap into these things that you've seen 100 times, that Kimmel and Oprah and all these folks have learned through their decades of interacting with people in high stakes situations. They all use validation skills all the time. They just don't know that that's what it is, and that that's what we call it.
No,
But it
they're
really is
master.
everywhere.
Yeah, they're master communicators.
And
Really.
because they've received a ton of positive and negative feedback to shape them over time. And most of them end up doing a lot of this stuff naturally.
Without even realizing they're doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like Oprah is an insanely effective validator. I think that is her whole shtick. The whole like Oprah effect is her just really being able to nail validation and see people and allow them to be seen, on a large studio audience or among a large studio audience.
Yeah, it's interesting because Ram Dass, I think it was Ram Dass, who said, "You'll know just how enlightened you truly are when you spend time with your family." It made me think of your
Hmm.
example of the uncle across the,
Yes.
Thanksgiving table, because all of us could really practice, I think, on our family members. That's a really good place to start, because if you can practice some of these skills with the toughest family member, that's the trigger, right? And once that trigger kind of loses its meaning or loses its power, then you'll be able to be more effective with everybody else in your life.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I love that point. That's why I was like, yeah, I had to learn this stuff in these really high stakes situations in therapy, but like, that's the best training ground. And turns out we've all got that uncle, that person, like, we all have people in our lives that can challenge us and provide, I'm going to say the obnoxious thing of opportunities to practice these
Yeah.
skills. They're all just opportunities. All these jerks, they're just great opportunities.
Yeah, I don't think that's obnoxious at all. I think it's great advice.
Oh, good, good. I hear
Or
good things.
people could you just go into Denny's and sit at the bar at 3 o'clock in the morning, and there'll be
Oh
plenty
my
of
gosh, that's
time
so right. That's so true.
So the last notch on your validation ladder is disclosure, right? Which we talked a little bit about that, but
Mm,
when does our disclosure invalidate someone's shame? And
mm.
yeah, talk about sort of the pitfalls of that, where it's effective and where it could go south.
Yeah, this is an interesting one because I always say, thoughts are not always valid in that they're not always logical. Um, Behavior is not always valid and that's not always effective in terms of someone's long-term goals. But emotions are always valid, except sometimes they're not. Um, Even though they're not, I don't really want you to get into the business of invalidating people's emotions. It doesn't play out well, with one exception. I come in over the top with invalidating someone's shame. All
Mm,
right. When people feel a deep, overwhelming sense of shame, if you can invalidate that and say, no, your shame doesn't belong here. I see
mm,
you. That is transformative. So I give everybody out there permission to invalidate other people's shame. Please do. And one of the best ways to do that is through disclosure. I observed this most obviously, that's not even the right word. It was almost like potently, like you can feel it in the room. If you've ever been to or led an AA or NA group, and you have folks going around and sharing their experiences, and you can palpably feel the shame rising and receding, both in the person who is speaking and the people around them who are seeing themselves in that person they respect, that person they like, and they're seeing themselves, a version of themselves, and they have empathy for that person. And in turn, they have empathy for themselves.
mm.
That's some powerful stuff, right? And we've all seen, like, someone sitting across from me says, "Oh yeah, I'm in AA too." Oh, okay, yeah, all right, you get it. Okay, cool. Like there's these moments where if we're expecting judgment and what we get is actually understanding and acceptance, the only word I have for it is transformative, I think. Um,
Yeah, because I think on so many levels, what you're saying is we need to feel heard, we need to feel acknowledged, and we've grown up with whatever, whatever it happens to be, there's shame around it. You've been molested, you've been raped, your husband threw you out of the house, you got fired, you got a DUI, like all these things that have kind of come up, and as you get older, you realize, wow, like even the people I looked up to have had many of these things happen to us. And so it gives people permission, I think, to be vulnerable.
Yeah, and in my work as, a therapist who's often working in rehabilitation, I take that a step further to folks who have actually done some of the things we're talking about. Folks who were shoplifting, folks who hit somebody while drunk driving,
Yeah, that's another one.
right? Um, Folks who did really horrible things that they are trying to drown out through substances and whatever else and denial and, which just results in them doing more horrible things. If I can help turn down the volume on that shame, and that's not to say they're not guilty and they shouldn't feel bad about it, but they shouldn't be waterboarded in shame to the extent that they just keep perpetuating the same behaviors. But that's kind of a whole other caliber.
Well, and also, you've heard the age-old saying, self-love, it starts here, and if you can't love yourself, you can't love another. And so regardless of that shame, regardless of what you've done in your life, there's always hope. And we see that, I have friends who volunteer their time in prisons, right? And
yes, very important work.
Very important work.
And I would add there's a flip to that, which is it's really hard to love yourself if you don't believe others love you.
Right.
And often you don't trust that they love you because they don't really know you, because you're not going to tell them those scary things that you're sure they would reject you for. Yeah. And so we live in this weird space of like, nobody really knows me. So how could I trust that they really love me? Am I really lovable? And everything that spirals from that.
And on and on. Yeah, it's a spiral. It's definitely a spiral, and because we're so often trained to be validated by what we do, not who we are, by just simply being, right? Just by simply being.
Where again, it's all about praise. We get praised for our work, we get praised for our performance. That is different from saying, I accept you independent of how you look or perform, right? We see love and acceptance as contingent upon performance, outcome, what have you, morality. And it's hard to feel accepted under those terms.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, especially in the West, right? I mean, I've lived all over the world, so it's kind of, when I think of other cultures, I remember just a really emotional moment where, we were on a tour of the Solomon Islands, and there was this guy who we saw every day. He was going back and forth between the islands to go to work in this dugout. This wasn't that long ago, maybe 3-4 years ago. And it was a dugout canoe. And he didn't have anything. He didn't have a backpack. He didn't have anything. I don't even think he had a jacket. I guess you don't really need a jacket if you live in the Solomon Islands. But he was so happy. You could just feel it. It was like one of those things where, like, he didn't need anybody or anything. He was just happy in the present moment. And I think the simpler lifestyles can really teach us a lot. That's another way.
Oh my gosh.
Suffering. Go to a remote island and just, put this away, right? Just put this away for a while and be one with nature. And that can be very healing also.
Yeah, we don't need the things that we surround ourselves with to feel worthy and safe. Yeah. Oftentimes they're actually burying our sense of worth.
Oh, well said.
Right?
Oh, that was a good one. That was a good one. Well, any last parting words that we might have missed that you wanted to share and we didn't talk about?
Just that I really encourage folks to like go out and play around with this stuff. Like if there's one piece of little advice, if I may give to folks, it would be like in your conversations, in your relationships this week, just think, should I respond with validation or problem solving here? Should I jump in with my solutions and my ideas, even in the workspace? Especially in the workspace. What would happen if you validated first? It's not always going to succeed. Okay. Sometimes it's best to respond with problems, but just start to experiment with that and maybe explore with seeing relationships dynamics in that light. Yeah.
I mean, that's great advice, Carolyn, because I think at a minimum, it's going to make people better listeners.
I hope so. I would encourage folks to please check me out on where else? Social media. Okay. At Dr. Caroline Fleck. Oh my gosh. Um,
You said it, I didn't.
I know. And my website for actually you can get behind the scenes clips, photos, outtakes from the book there as well. drcarolinefleck.com.
Beautiful. Well, I encourage everybody to get a copy of the book, and we'll be putting a link at the end of this interview so that people can just click on it and buy it.
Awesome.
Yeah. So
Awesome.
thanks so much.
Thank you.